In this lecture, I'm going to turn to the next main topic of Module 1, Critical Thinking. This is on biases and beliefs. So as you can see, my lighting's a little better, although I'm still having some problems here, but I hope to fix that. In any case, let's think about this. The reading, as I've noted on the website, I've changed the reading. I'm away from the Stanford Encyclopedia reading on biases, which is still a great thing. Have a look at it. But I'm going to concentrate in this video set on the reading from Inference and Persuasion, Chapter 6, primarily on belief, to articulate and discuss a little bit about belief, and I'll tie it to bias. And in matter of fact, I'm going to begin with the notion of bias. Okay, so bias I'm going to talk about in the sense as unconsciously affecting us. That seems to be what most people are interested in. A conscious bias is perfectly possible. You're aware of your preferences or prejudices or whatever you want to call them, the ways you lean towards certain thing and how you make your decisions. And so what I wanted to do in the previous lectures is to make you more aware of how you might have certain kinds of biases creeping in through use of fallacious arguments, etc., etc. Now I just want to go a little bit, shall we say, a little deeper into this notion of unconscious bias, and then go back to the notion of belief, and to show that belief's pretty problematic as a concept. Okay, even though we use it every day, you know, you believe and you talk about belief with no problems, but it's actually a rather mysterious concept. So bias as unconsciously affecting us. We're sort of used to that term, mainly when you think about Sigmund Freud, right? In the early 20th century, Freud and Freudianism was quite the rage for a while. And Freud comes along, and, you know, he's certainly not the first person to do this, as I'll talk in a second. Plato did it centuries before. But Freud really talked about this kind of a notion of implicit bias. In other words, what he did is he thought of the mind as a divided entity, right? We tend to think of our minds as unities. No, it's actually a kind of divided entity. And he has a tripartite, three-part structure, tripartite. And I'm not going to go into that. I just want to get across sort of the big Freudian picture, and that is that the mind is divided. And so you don't want to think of your mind as this single entity. It's actually a divided one, and the parts in some ways work together, and the parts also conflict with each other. So this notion of a divided mind means, for Freud, that there is a part of it that's conscious. Yeah, all the stuff that you know and think about directly, that you're aware of, to use a simple term, awareness, and another part that's not aware, the unconscious. And that the mind as a totality is often influenced by non-conscious desires and forces. That's an interesting one, an unconscious desire. So a desire for something that's not conscious. Normally we think of our desires as, if I say, what's a desire? You'd say, well, I want something. I desire. I know that I want something. So we often think of desires as intrinsically conscious entities in our mind. Freud was starting to talk about, no, actually you have unconscious desires, things that you want you're not even aware of. So that's the whole idea of an implicit bias, is a desire that's pushing you around. So behavior then becomes a product of conscious and non-conscious forces, and sometimes behavior is a result, shall we say, even more so of an unconscious force or a desire. And we get this image in Freud of the mind kind of like an iceberg. Here's a lousy drawing of an iceberg, but as you know, very little of it is above water. Most of it is below. Usually 9/10 is what's quoted, but whatever. The majority is below. And so this might be you think of this as the conscious part that's above water. Most of it's down below. And this is actually a combination of these, basically moves you around, or you move around under the guidance of these. And so you could have most of your behavior being determined by these unconscious forces. Now, that was actually nothing new. It seemed new, and I'll explain why it seemed new, but it actually was a kind of a rediscovery or a renaissance, if you will, in thinking about the mind. And it was a renaissance of what? Plato. Plato had a view of the mind that also was divided. So we're going to now have a look at Plato's view of the mind.